Excuse me, are you sure you are supposed to be here today? Or did you perhaps wander into this private event by mistake while looking for somewhere else?
The sentence wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. In rooms filled with money, people learn how to embarrass someone quietly. The ballroom didn't completely stop moving after Vanessa Whitmore said it, but something changed. Conversations softened. Forks paused halfway to plates. Even the violinist near the stage seemed to lose rhythm for a second. People turned carefully, pretending not to look while making sure they saw everything. The young man standing near the champagne tower looked down briefly at his faded sneakers. White soles worn grey from years of use, dark jeans with creases near the knees, plain charcoal jacket, no designer logo, no expensive watch. Nothing about him matched the room around him. The wedding itself looked like something pulled from the cover of a luxury magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings 30 feet high. Imported flowers covered almost every table. Guests walked around balancing champagne glasses that cost more than some people's monthly grocery bills. Outside the venue, rows of black SUVs and luxury cars stretched along the curb, while valets rushed through the cold Manhattan night, trying to keep up. This wasn't just another wedding. This was the Whitmore wedding. And in New York financial circles, the Whitmore family name carried weight. Old money, political connections, real estate, investments, charity galas, the kind of family that appeared in newspapers without trying, the kind of family people smiled differently around. Which was exactly why the man standing alone near the window looked so out of place. Vanessa crossed her arms as she stared at him. Her red designer dress shimmered beneath the ballroom lights, while diamond earrings caught reflections every time she moved her head. She had spent her whole life around powerful people, and powerful people usually came dressed like they wanted the world to know it. The man near the champagne tower looked like he had walked in from the wrong street entirely. And then she laughed. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the people closest to her to hear it. But humiliation spreads fast in wealthy rooms, faster than gossip, faster than music, faster than common sense. Within seconds, several guests had quietly taken out their phones. One woman near the bar leaned toward her husband and whispered something while staring directly at the young man. Another guest smiled into his drink like he was watching entertainment he didn't have to pay for. The room had found its target for the evening. The strange thing was, the young man never reacted. No anger, no embarrassment, no nervous explanation. He just looked at Vanessa calmly, the same way someone watches rain hit a window. That calmness unsettled people more than anything else could have, because most people, when cornered publicly, rush to defend themselves. They explain, they apologize, they try to earn approval from strangers. He didn't. And that's when Vanessa made the mistake that would change the entire night. Private event, she said with a polite smile that wasn't polite at all. I think security may have missed you at the entrance. A few people nearby laughed softly. The young man glanced around the ballroom one time before answering. I was invited. That response should have ended the conversation. Instead, it made things worse. Vanessa smiled again, but this time the smile looked sharper. Really, she said, by who? There was a pause then. Small, quiet, but important. Because the young man looked directly at her before speaking, and when he answered, his voice carried no fear at all. By the groom. That was the moment several guests stopped pretending not to listen. Vanessa tilted her head slightly. She almost looked amused now. Around her, people shifted closer without making it obvious. Wealthy people loved public embarrassment as long as it wasn't happening to them. And this moment was quickly becoming the most interesting thing in the room. The groom, Ethan Whitmore, was currently across the ballroom taking photographs with investors, politicians, and members of both families. Vanessa knew every person Ethan had invited personally. She had helped organize seating charts herself. She knew the CEOs, the college friends, the athletes, the business partners, the old family friends. She had never seen this man before, in her life. Which meant one of two things had happened. Either he was lying, or something far more complicated was standing in front of her. The young man remained calm, while whispers spread behind him like smoke. Who is he? Did somebody actually invite him? Maybe he works for the venue. No staff member would dress like that. One guest quietly started recording with his phone. Another guest smirked and said, "This is about to get ugly." And for a moment, it looked like they were right. Because Vanessa slowly reached for her phone while keeping her eyes locked on the young man. "Well," she said softly, "let's ask Ethan together." The ballroom suddenly felt smaller. The music sounded farther away. Even the people dancing near the stage had begun watching now. And still, the young man never moved, never explained, never panicked, which should have told everyone in that room something important. People who truly don't belong usually try desperately to prove that they do. But people who already know exactly who they are, they stay calm. And nobody in that ballroom understood that yet. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The Whitmore wedding had already been called one of the biggest social events of the year before the night had even started. Financial blogs wrote about it for weeks. Local newspapers tracked celebrity arrivals outside the Manhattan venue hours before the ceremony began. One media outlet estimated the wedding cost somewhere close to $50,000 before midnight even arrived. Every inch of the ballroom reflected it. Imported flowers from Italy lined the marble entrance. Gold-trimmed place settings covered tables large enough to seat entire families. Soft piano music floated through the room, while servers carried silver trays of champagne between groups of politicians, investors, professional athletes, and executives whose companies appeared on the stock market every morning. And somehow, in the middle of all that wealth, one man stood out more than anyone else there. Not because he was loud, not because he demanded attention, but because he looked like he didn't belong in the room at all. The young man standing near the skyline window seemed completely disconnected from the energy around him. While guests adjusted $1,000 watches and straightened designer jackets every time someone important walked by, he stayed perfectly still, calm, quiet, observing everything without trying to be noticed. It almost looked intentional. That's what confused people. Most people who accidentally enter rooms they don't belong in become uncomfortable fast. They avoid eye contact. They explain themselves before anyone asks questions. They try to disappear. This man did the opposite. He looked completely at ease. And that unsettled the room more than his clothes ever could. Across the ballroom, Vanessa Whitmore continued watching him while pretending not to. Her expression had changed slightly now. The amusement was still there, but curiosity had started replacing it. Something about him bothered her in a way she couldn't explain yet. It wasn't just the fact that he looked out of place. It was the feeling that he somehow wasn't intimidated by any of this. Not the ballroom. Not the money. Not the people staring at him. And definitely not her. The strange part was, Vanessa was used to reading people quickly. Growing up in the Whitmore family trained her to notice status immediately. She could usually tell where someone fits socially within seconds of meeting them. Wealthy people developed that skill early. The clothes, the posture, the confidence, the watches, the shoes, every detail mattered in rooms like these. But this man disrupted all of it. Because nothing about him matched the reaction he should have been having. Guests nearby continued whispering while glancing toward him every few seconds. Who invited him? Did security seriously let him walk in? He looks familiar. No, I don't think so. Maybe somebody's assistant. That's not an assistant. Questions moved through the ballroom, faster than answers. Meanwhile, the young man remained near the window overlooking Manhattan's skyline, as if the entire situation barely interested him. The city lights reflected softly against the glass behind him, while conversations around the ballroom slowly shifted away from the wedding itself and toward him. Even members of the Whitmore family had started noticing. Marcus Whitmore stood near the center of the ballroom speaking with two business partners, while photographers circled nearby capturing staged smiles and expensive handshakes. At 62 years old, Marcus carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had spent decades building influence powerful enough to move markets. His real estate company owned luxury properties across multiple states. Politicians attended his charity events. Financial magazines called him one of the most connected businessmen in New York. And yet, even Marcus eventually noticed the tension forming near the Champagne Tower. His eyes drifted briefly toward the young man by the window before returning to the conversation in front of him. But something in his expression changed for half a second, almost like recognition trying to surface through memory. Vanessa noticed that too, which only deepened the mystery growing inside her. Because now none of this made sense anymore. If the young man truly didn't belong there, security should have stopped him downstairs before he ever reached the ballroom. The Whitmores hired professional event security for every major gathering. Nobody entered without clearance. So why had no one removed him? Why did nobody from security seem concerned? And why did Marcus Whitmore himself seem distracted the moment he saw him? Vanessa folded her arms tighter while watching the young man from across the room. The closer she looked, the more certain she became that she had seen him somewhere before, maybe in a photograph, maybe online, maybe at another event years ago, but the memory stayed just out of reach. Then another thought entered her mind. Whoever he was, why wasn't he defending himself? Most people would have argued by now. They would have explained who invited them. They would have pulled out messages, phone calls, proof. Pride alone usually pushed people into defending their dignity when an entire room questioned their presence. But this man seemed completely unbothered. Almost like he had seen situations like this before. And that possibility made the atmosphere around him even stranger. Because people who remain calm during humiliation usually know something everyone else doesn't. Vanessa slowly glanced down at the phone, still resting in her hand. One text message to Ethan Whitmore would settle everything immediately. Either this man was lying, or the entire ballroom was about to realize they had misunderstood something important. But the strangest part wasn't how underdressed he looked. It was how calm he remained while the entire room judged him. Jordan Hale was 28 years old, and almost nobody in that ballroom would have guessed anything correctly about him if given 100 chances. That had happened his entire life. People saw the quiet personality first and made assumptions immediately after. Some mistook his silence for insecurity, others confused humility for weakness. Jordan rarely corrected them. He learned years earlier that most people preferred quick conclusions over uncomfortable curiosity. Letting people underestimate him usually told him more about them than it did about himself. 3 hours earlier, he had stepped off a flight from Seattle carrying nothing except a worn backpack and a small black duffel bag. While first-class passengers rushed through the airport speaking into phones and checking expensive watches, Jordan moved calmly through the crowd without attracting attention. He had traveled enough to understand something most wealthy people never experienced. The less people noticed you, the more honestly they behaved around you. The taxi ride into Manhattan had been quiet. Rain streaked softly across the windows, while traffic crawled through glowing city streets filled with headlights, billboards, and reflections from office towers. The driver attempted small talk twice before giving up after Jordan answered politely with only a few words. Instead, Jordan spent most of the ride staring out at the skyline with the expression of someone replaying old thoughts in his head. Because this night was never supposed to surprise him. Jordan had attended rooms like this before, but tonight was different. The old backpack resting beside him during the drive looked almost intentional against the luxury surrounding the city. Most people at the Whitmore wedding would spend more money on shoes than Jordan appeared to own altogether. But that contrast had become part of the point long ago. His father believed appearance changed the way truth revealed itself. Jordan remembered hearing those words for the first time when he was 16 years old. Back then, he hadn't understood them. At 28, he understood them perfectly. Across the city, several hours before the wedding ceremony began, Vanessa Whitmore stood in front of a mirror while makeup artists and stylists moved around her hotel suite adjusting details that most people would never even notice. Her red designer dress hung carefully near the window, while jewelry boxes covered nearly every surface in the room. Champagne glasses rested beside cosmetic trays. Bridesmaids laughed loudly near the couch, while somebody filmed short videos for social media. Vanessa looked completely natural inside environments like this because she had been raised in them. Luxury wasn't exciting to her. It was normal. As the younger daughter of Marcus Whitmore, Vanessa grew up attending charity galas, private fundraisers, country club dinners, and elite social events where status shaped almost every interaction. She learned early that appearance mattered before people even opened their mouths. The right watch opened conversations. The right suit created opportunities. The wrong outfit could quietly close doors before someone ever introduced themselves. Nobody had directly taught her to judge people. The world around her had taught her slowly over time. And after years of living inside wealthy environments, certain instincts became automatic. Vanessa noticed details constantly without even trying. Shoes, watches, posture, confidence, labels. She could usually estimate someone's social position within seconds. Most of the time, she was right. That's why Jordan unsettled her almost immediately. Because nothing about him made sense according to the rules she spent her entire life learning. He didn't look wealthy. He didn't behave insecure. And somehow, those two things together bothered her more than she wanted to admit. One of Vanessa's friends had laughed earlier while helping adjust her earrings and joked that half the guests attending the wedding cared more about networking than celebrating the marriage itself. Vanessa laughed too because everyone knew it was true. Events like these weren't just family celebrations. They were social competitions disguised as formal gatherings. Investors met investors. Politicians shook hands with executives. People measured each other constantly without saying it out loud. And tonight, Jordan Hale looked like someone who had ignored every rule required to survive rooms like these, which immediately made him suspicious. Back inside the ballroom, whispers still drifted quietly between guests while Jordan remained standing near the skyline window. Nobody realized the strange irony unfolding in front of them yet. The man they viewed as least important in the room had spent most of his life inside rooms far more powerful than this one. Jordan's father believed expensive rooms revealed people's true character faster than anything else. Not because wealth changed people, but because comfort exposed them. People became honest when they believed somebody beneath them couldn't affect their future. Jordan understood that lesson better every year. And tonight, without realizing it, the Whitmore wedding had already started revealing exactly what kind of people filled the ballroom. The frightening part was, most of them still thought they were judging him, when in reality, something else had quietly begun judging them first. By the time Vanessa Whitmore finally started walking toward Jordan Hale, enough people in the ballroom had noticed the situation for the atmosphere to change completely. It happened gradually at first. A conversation near the bar became quieter. Two investors paused mid-sentence while watching from across the room. One woman, pretending to check messages on her phone, slowly lowered it just enough to keep Jordan in view. Wealthy rooms operated differently during uncomfortable moments. Nobody wanted to appear openly rude, but nobody wanted to miss the humiliation either. Jordan noticed all of it. And still, he remained calm. That calmness frustrated people more with every passing second. Vanessa crossed the ballroom carefully, her heels tapping softly against polished marble floors, while several guests subtly shifted their attention toward her. Her expression remained controlled, but inside, curiosity had started mixing with irritation. She wanted answers now. More importantly, she wanted the room to see she was handling the situation. Because in environments like this, status wasn't only about wealth. It was about control. And right now, Jordan Hale was disrupting the entire atmosphere simply by standing there quietly. When Vanessa finally stopped in front of him, nearby conversations nearly disappeared altogether. Jordan turned slightly toward her. The skyline behind him reflected across the ballroom windows, while Manhattan lights glowed against the dark night outside. For a brief moment, the contrast between them looked almost symbolic. Vanessa dressed in luxury from head to toe, Jordan standing there in worn sneakers and a plain charcoal jacket that probably cost less than her handbag. Vanessa offered a polite smile, but it was the kind of smile people use when they've already decided something about you. "Hi," she said softly, "I don't think we've met." Jordan nodded once. "No, I don't think so." Her eyes moved briefly toward his clothes again, before returning to his face. "Can I ask who invited you tonight?" The question sounded calm. Reasonable even. Which made it worse. Several guests nearby immediately stopped, pretending not to listen. One man near the champagne tower turned his body slightly to get a better view while keeping his drink near his mouth. A younger woman standing beside the dance floor quietly unlocked her phone camera beneath waist level. Across the ballroom, the bartender froze mid-pour while watching the interaction unfold through rows of crystal glasses. Jordan answered without hesitation. "The groom invited me." Vanessa's smile barely changed, but the expression in her eyes shifted immediately. Behind her, one of her friends let out a short laugh before covering her mouth too late to hide it. Another exchanged a quick look with someone nearby as whispers spread faster through the crowd. "The groom." Jordan nodded calmly, "Yes." Vanessa folded her arms lightly, personally. "Yes." That answer triggered another quiet laugh from one of her friends standing behind her shoulder. This time, several nearby guests smiled openly. Somebody whispered something that caused another small wave of amusement to move through the group. Jordan heard all of it. Every whisper, every smirk, every judgment being made about him in real time. And somehow, nothing about his expression changed. That unsettled Vanessa more than she wanted to admit. Because by now most people would have started defending themselves, they would have become uncomfortable under the attention, maybe nervous, maybe angry, at minimum, embarrassed. Jordan remained completely steady. Like none of this surprised him. Vanessa tilted her head slightly while studying him closer. "I'm sorry," she said, still using that same cold politeness, "but this is a private wedding. Security is usually very careful with invitations." Jordan nodded once again. "I understand." The calmness in his voice only made the tension heavier. One guest near the back quietly muttered, "This guy definitely crashed the wedding." Another whispered, "Why isn't he leaving?" Someone else responded softly, "Because he thinks he belongs here." Across the ballroom, Ethan Whitmore's bride briefly noticed the growing tension near the skyline windows while posing for photographs with family members. Her smile faded slightly for a moment before she glanced toward Vanessa standing with Jordan. Even from a distance, she could tell something uncomfortable was happening. Meanwhile, the phone recording beneath one guest's hand continued capturing everything. Vanessa took a small breath before speaking again. "Do you have an invitation with you?" Jordan shook his head once. No. That answer landed exactly how the room expected it to. A few nearby guests exchanged knowing looks immediately. One older man smirked directly into his champagne glass, while another woman quietly whispered, "There it is." Vanessa gave a slow nod, like she had finally confirmed something. "I see." But Jordan spoke again before she could continue. "I was invited personally." The room grew quieter. Not dramatically, just enough for the discomfort to spread deeper. Vanessa stared at him for a second longer this time. Somewhere behind her, another guest quietly laughed under their breath. Someone else whispered that security should already be involved by now. But what nobody understood yet was that Jordan Hale had absolutely no intention of defending himself to strangers. And that refusal to panic was slowly making everyone around him more uncomfortable than he was. Vanessa finally reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Her expression remained calm, but there was sharpness underneath it now, the kind that appears when embarrassment starts turning into irritation. "Well," she said quietly, looking directly at Jordan, "I'm calling the groom right now." And suddenly, the entire ballroom seemed to stop breathing for a second. Vanessa Whitmore stared down at her phone for half a second before pressing the call button. Around her, the ballroom remained suspended in that strange social silence wealthy people created whenever embarrassment entered the room. Nobody openly acknowledged what was happening, yet somehow everybody had become part of it. Conversations slowed. Smiles looked less natural. Even guests pretending to focus on dinner or drinks kept glancing toward Vanessa and Jordan every few seconds. Jordan stood exactly where he had been the entire time. Still calm. Still unreadable. That calmness had started affecting the room in ways nobody expected. Because now people weren't only wondering whether he belonged there. They were beginning to wonder why he wasn't nervous. Across the ballroom, Ethan Whitmore stood beside the stage, laughing politely at something one of Marcus Whitmore's business associates had just said. Cameras flashed nearby while wedding staff moved carefully between tables carrying expensive bottles of champagne. Ethan looked exactly how people expected wealthy grooms to look. Tailored tuxedo, perfect posture, relaxed confidence, the image of someone born into powerful circles. Then his phone vibrated. At first, he barely glanced at it. But the moment he read Vanessa's message, something changed in his face immediately. His expression froze. Not anger, not confusion, recognition. The conversation around him faded while Ethan stared at the screen for another second longer than normal. Nearby guests noticed the shift instantly. One of the investors speaking to him stopped talking mid-sentence. Ethan looked back toward the ballroom slowly, eyes moving across the crowd until they landed near the skyline windows. Near Jordan. And then, Ethan smiled. Not politely, not socially, genuinely. The reaction was so unexpected that even the people standing closest to him noticed immediately. Without explaining anything, Ethan handed his champagne glass to a nearby server and started moving quickly through the ballroom. Toward Jordan. Toward the exact man everyone else had quietly decided didn't belong there. The energy in the room changed instantly. Several guests turned fully now instead of pretending not to stare. One woman lowered her phone completely. A man near the bar frowned slightly like his brain was trying to catch up to what he was seeing. Vanessa herself remained frozen in place, while Ethan crossed the ballroom directly toward them without hesitation. Jordan finally shifted slightly as Ethan approached. And then it happened. Ethan Whitmore broke into a smile and pulled Jordan into a hug right there in front of everyone. A real hug. The kind shared between people who genuinely knew each other well. The ballroom practically stopped breathing. "Jordan," Ethan said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, Why didn't you tell me you were here? For the first time all night, visible confusion spread across Vanessa Whitmore's face. Not small confusion. Real confusion. The kind that arrives when reality suddenly stops, matching the story you convinced yourself was true. Jordan gave a small smile. You looked busy. Ethan laughed softly and grabbed his shoulder again. Busy? You flew all the way from Seattle for this wedding and you were just standing over here by yourself. Jordan shrugged slightly, didn't want to interrupt. Interrupt. The word hit several nearby guests harder than it should have. Because suddenly, the situation looked completely different. The awkward man in cheap clothes wasn't someone trying to sneak into a wealthy wedding. He was someone important enough to casually stand alone while everyone else embarrassed themselves around him. And now people started replaying the last several minutes inside their heads. The whispers, the smirks, the recording phones. Vanessa felt heat rise slowly into her chest. Her grip tightened slightly around the champagne glass, still resting in her hand. Tiny ripples moved across the surface of the drink as her fingers trembled almost invisibly. Around her, guests who had laughed moments earlier now looked carefully away from eye contact. Nobody wanted ownership of the situation anymore. Jordan, meanwhile, remained completely composed. No smug smile. No anger. No attempt to embarrass Vanessa back. Which somehow made the moment even heavier. Ethan looked between them briefly. Everything okay over here? There was a pause. A dangerous one. Vanessa opened her mouth slightly before stopping herself. Jordan answered first. Yeah, he said calmly, we were just talking. The grace in that response landed harder than humiliation would have. Because Jordan had just given Vanessa an exit. And she knew it. Ethan nodded casually, completely unaware of the emotional disaster that had unfolded before he arrived. Come on, he said, smiling at Jordan. There's a lot of people here excited to see you. See you. Not meet you. See you. Another detail the room immediately noticed. As Ethan guided Jordan further into the ballroom, whispers exploded quietly in every direction. Who is he? How does Ethan know him? Did Vanessa seriously just question him in front of everyone? I told you he looked familiar. No, wait. One of Vanessa's friends slowly stepped closer beside her, while staring toward Jordan and Ethan disappearing deeper into the crowd. Her voice dropped almost to a whisper. Vanessa. She swallowed once before speaking again. Do you even know who that is? The atmosphere inside the ballroom never fully recovered after Ethan Whitmore hugged Jordan Hale in front of everyone. Even as conversations slowly restarted and music continued playing near the dance floor, something underneath the room had shifted permanently. Guests who had laughed earlier now avoided discussing the situation directly. Others quietly searched Jordan's face, trying to figure out how they had missed something so important. The whispers spreading across the ballroom sounded different now. Less judgment, more concern. And Vanessa Whitmore felt every second of it. For the first time all night, she stopped paying attention to appearances and started paying attention to reactions. The way people suddenly straightened when Jordan walked past. The way Ethan treated him like someone who mattered deeply. The way older executives near the bar narrowed their eyes slightly like recognition was finally beginning to settle in. Vanessa's stomach tightened slowly. Because the room no longer looked at Jordan like an outsider. Now they were looking at him like a mystery they should have recognized sooner. Then everything changed again. Outside the venue, a long black car pulled quietly toward the entrance beneath glowing hotel lights. No dramatic arrival, no crowd of bodyguards, no flashing cameras announcing importance, just quiet movement, quiet power, the kind wealthy people carried once they no longer needed attention to prove status. But inside the ballroom, several people noticed immediately. One of the hotel staff near the entrance straightened almost instantly. A valet standing outside adjusted his jacket before rushing toward the curb. Near the lobby doors, two event coordinators exchanged nervous glances before moving quickly toward the entrance. Marcus Whitmore noticed the reaction too. And that reaction alone told him exactly who had arrived. Without excusing himself from the conversation he was having, Marcus began walking briskly toward the ballroom entrance while trying to maintain composure. But people saw it. Wealthy rooms notice movement before words. And the moment Marcus Whitmore started moving faster than normal, nearby guests instinctively turned toward the doors. The ballroom slowly quieted again. Then the car door opened. Richard Hale stepped out calmly into the Manhattan night. And suddenly, several people inside the ballroom stopped breathing for a second. Because almost everyone there knew that name. Richard Hale, billionaire investor, private equity giant, board member across multiple international companies, part owner of the very luxury hotel chain hosting the wedding itself. A man powerful enough to influence entire industries without ever needing public attention to do it. And somehow, nobody had connected him to Jordan until now. Richard adjusted the sleeve of his dark coat once before entering the building. No smile, no performance, just quiet certainty, the kind built through decades of success, powerful enough to make introductions unnecessary. Inside the ballroom, whispers spread instantly. "Oh my God! That's Richard Hale! Wait! Hale! No way!" Vanessa felt the blood drain slowly from her face. Her eyes moved immediately toward Jordan standing near Ethan across the ballroom. Suddenly, the similarities became impossible not to see. The posture, the calmness, the eyes, the stillness both men carried like armor. And all at once, everything crashed together inside her mind. Jordan was never nervous because he had never been beneath anyone in that room. He had never needed approval, never needed acceptance, never needed to prove he belonged. She had spent the last 20 minutes trying to measure someone whose life existed far above the standards she used to judge people. And the worst part wasn't that she had embarrassed Jordan. It was that she had exposed herself, her assumptions, her arrogance, her obsession with appearances. The room hadn't witnessed Jordan failing to belong. It had witnessed Vanessa revealing exactly how quickly she judged people based on what they wore. Meanwhile, Richard Hale walked through the ballroom entrance without stopping once. Several executives tried greeting him. He barely acknowledged them. One politician stepped slightly forward to shake his hand. Richard nodded politely without slowing down. His attention stayed fixed on one person only. Jordan. The crowd naturally parted as Richard crossed the ballroom floor. Even the music near the dance floor suddenly felt quieter now. Conversations faded completely. Guests stepped aside instinctively while watching one of the most powerful men in the country walk directly toward the young man in faded sneakers. Jordan turned as his father approached. And for the first time all night, a small genuine smile crossed his face. Richard reached him, placed one hand firmly on his shoulder, and said quietly, "You should have told me you got here already." The silence that followed felt enormous. Not because Richard raised his voice, but because the entire ballroom finally understood exactly who Jordan Hale really was. Vanessa stared at them from across the room, completely frozen. Jordan had never walked into the wedding trying to impress anyone. He already belonged in rooms like this long before anyone there even knew his name. And suddenly, every whisper, every smirk, every judgment made earlier in the night returned to haunt the people who made them. But what Richard Hale said next changed Vanessa Whitmore forever. For the next several minutes, the ballroom tried pretending everything had returned to normal. Music continued near the dance floor. Servers resumed carrying champagne between tables. Conversations slowly restarted. But underneath the polished surface of the Whitmore wedding, something uncomfortable lingered now. The room had witnessed itself too clearly. And Vanessa Whitmore felt that more than anyone else. She stood near the edge of the ballroom, holding a champagne glass she hadn't touched in almost 20 minutes. Across the room, Jordan Hale spoke calmly with Ethan and Richard Hale, while several guests who had ignored him earlier now laughed a little too hard at everything he said. The sudden change in behavior made Vanessa feel worse somehow. Because Jordan himself had never changed. Only the room did. That realization stayed with her longer than the embarrassment. For the first time that night, Vanessa stopped seeing Jordan through the lens of wealth, status, and appearances. Instead, she replayed the moment near the skyline window again and again inside her mind. The calmness in his voice, the patience, the complete absence of anger even while people judged him openly. And slowly, another realization settled in. Jordan had actually protected her. He could have humiliated her the moment Ethan arrived. He could have exposed her in front of everyone the same way she exposed him. Instead, he gave her a way out. That bothered her more than public embarrassment ever could. A few minutes later, Vanessa quietly stepped away from the crowd and found Jordan standing alone near the hallway leading toward the outdoor terrace. For the first time all evening, neither of them spoke immediately. The city skyline glowed through the glass windows behind them while distant traffic lights flickered far below Manhattan rooftops. The wedding music sounded softer here, farther away. Vanessa finally looked at him directly. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "No dramatic tears. No performance. Just honesty." Jordan stayed silent and let her continue. "I judged you before you even spoke," she admitted. "And the worst part is, I actually thought I was being reasonable." Jordan studied her expression for a second before answering. "You were being honest." Vanessa gave a small, uncomfortable laugh. "That's somehow worse." There was another pause between them. Then Jordan glanced down briefly at his faded sneakers before speaking again. "My father makes me do this once every year." Vanessa frowned slightly. "What?" Jordan leaned lightly against the wall beside the window. "He sends me into places like this dressed as plainly as possible. No expensive watch, no driver, no security, nothing that tells people who I am." Vanessa stared at him silently. At first, she thought he was joking. But his expression never changed. "Why?" she asked softly. Jordan looked back toward the ballroom, where laughter and music continued under the glow of crystal chandeliers. Then he answered quietly. "He says the fastest way to learn who people are is to let them think you have nothing." The words settled heavily between them. Vanessa felt something shift deep inside her chest as the meaning fully landed. Suddenly, the entire night looked different. Jordan was never the one being tested. Everyone else was. The whispers, the smirks, the judgment, the recording phones, the assumptions. All of it revealed far more about the people in that ballroom than it ever revealed about him. And Vanessa realized she had failed the test almost immediately. Not because she was cruel, but because wealth had trained her to confuse appearance with value for so many years that she stopped questioning it. Jordan had walked into the ballroom carrying absolutely nothing he needed to prove. Meanwhile, almost everyone else there had spent the entire night trying desperately to prove who they were. Vanessa lowered her eyes for a second before quietly shaking her head. "I really thought I understood people," she admitted. Jordan gave a small smile. "Most people do." For a moment, neither of them spoke again. The noise of the wedding continued softly behind them, while Manhattan lights stretched endlessly outside the glass windows. And somewhere inside the ballroom, crystal chandeliers worth thousands of dollars still glowed above crowds of wealthy guests, discussing investments, status, and appearances. But the most expensive thing in that ballroom wasn't the chandelier. It was character. And most people, they couldn't afford it. Near midnight, the Whitmore wedding slowly began emptying into the Manhattan night. Luxury cars lined the curb outside the hotel, while guests stepped carefully onto wet pavement beneath glowing city lights. Valets hurried between vehicles. Conversations softened. Laughter drifted through the cold air as the final champagne glasses disappeared from silver trays. But inside the ballroom, the energy felt different now. Quieter, more reflective. Some guests still talked about the ceremony. Others talked about Jordan Hale. Or more specifically, the way the entire room had misjudged him. Vanessa Whitmore stood silently near the ballroom windows one last time, watching the city skyline stretch endlessly across the darkness. Earlier that evening, she had looked at Jordan and seen someone beneath the room around him. Now she understood how dangerous assumptions could become when people stopped seeing human beings and started seeing appearances instead. Across the lobby, Jordan walked beside Richard Hale toward the hotel entrance, while several executives and investors quietly stepped aside to let them pass. Richard spoke calmly to his son, while Jordan listened with the same quiet composure he had carried all night. Neither man looked interested in attention. Neither seemed impressed by the wealth surrounding them. And somehow, that made them stand out more than anyone else there. Vanessa watched them disappear through the hotel doors and into the Manhattan night before lowering her eyes thoughtfully for a moment. Because some lessons arrive loudly, and others arrive disguised as embarrassment. Sometimes the people who look the simplest carry the most power. And sometimes the loudest embarrassment reveals more about the crowd than the person being judged. Jordan Hale never walked into that ballroom trying to prove his worth. Everyone else did. What would you have done in Vanessa's position? And have you ever been judged because of the way you looked? Let us know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, subscribe now for more emotional true stories, shocking twists, and cinematic real-life drama.